Welcome to the Insurance Playbook, the show that pulls back the curtain on the insurance industry and gives you the stories, strategies, and insider tips you need to win. Sponsored by Spark AI Partners. Today's guest has one of the most unique resumes in the industry. From the battlefield to the Senate floor and all the way to the boardroom, Jeff Brandis spent 12 years in the Florida legislature helping shape some of the biggest insurance reforms in state history. Now he serves as chairman of Patriot Select Insurance and leads the Florida Policy Project, a nonprofit focused on smarter strategy in housing, insurance, and infrastructure. In today's episode, Jeff reveals how Florida went from near insurance collapse to recovery, how legislation shapes every premium, and why sometimes the best move government can make is to step aside. We are glad that you're here. We're super excited to have Jeff on. Long story short, he's been in the Army, 101st Airborne, served in Iraq, went on in legislature as a senator, well, quite a few things. But rather than me telling Jeff, why don't you take us through your background before you got involved in insurance?
I joined the Army 7 days after high school. I spent 11 years in the military, spent 2003, 2004 in Iraq with the 101st. I got out in 2007 and joined my family business and thought I was going to work there the rest of my life. They sold that company in 2006 to figure out what else I was going to do. So I stayed on with the family business for a little bit after that and ended up running for the legislature in 2010, was elected to the Florida House in 2010. And then the Florida Senate in 2012 and termed out in 2022, held a variety of roles in the Florida legislature. Kind of my big takeaway after 12 years in the legislature was that everything in Tallahassee is tactical. There is really no long-term strategy in most areas of public policy. So I'm a policy addict and I needed some methadone to stay involved. And so I started a nonprofit. I've started a nonprofit called the Florida Policy Project. We work on identifying best practices in Florida in 4 policy areas: housing, insurance, transportation, and the criminal justice and prison system. So those are kind of 4 areas that I was really passionate about when I was in the legislature, and excited that I get to keep still doing policy work and trying to push best practices in the state of Florida. So I write a ton of op-eds and I work on a lot of different issues. And I'm the chairman of a property insurance company called Patriot Select here in Florida. So it's exciting to kind of see it from both angles. And I still do a lot of discussions, and I'm still up in Tallahassee quite a bit, having discussions with legislators on kind of how to make the market better on the property insurance side, but also on the housing side and on the criminal justice and prison side and transportation.
Absolutely. And I know, we discuss a lot of insurance here on the podcast from all walks of, insurance and just kind of peeling back the curtain there. But just so we understand you a little bit better as well, from military and the family business, what made you what was that moment where you were like, hey, you know what? I want to get involved in legislature. I want to get involved in politics.
Sure. When I was in Iraq, I read a book called Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman. And I realized I was a libertarian, and I kind of saw the world through the libertarian lens, where I wanted more freedom and less government. And I would say I'm a libertarian with a capital L, Republican with little r, but I had to run as a Republican. So I ran. But what made me an odd bird in Tallahassee was because I wanted smaller government than even my colleagues in the Republican Party wanted. And I thought about problems in a different way than traditionally that the Republicans even thought about some of these challenges. Oftentimes I was at odds with my Republican colleagues over that, but it was not because I wanted to grow government, because I wanted to shrink it even more than they were willing to. So it's an exciting time to be. It was always great to be kind of, I felt like I knew where my true north was, having that kind of libertarian perspective as a Republican. And so that gave me a lot of perspective into kind of where I wanted to see it. But I also got to be there through the entirety of the insurance crisis that Florida went through, from 2010 to, the years where we had no real storms, to seeing the growth of assignment of benefits and the abuse of the legal situation that Florida found itself in, and then the resolution of that at the end of 2022. So it's been an exciting run, and I've learned a lot. I always describe the legislature as kind of like the first movie of the Matrix, right? You take the red or the blue pill, and then you get to determine, wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in the Matrix. None of this is really real, because Tallahassee is, with the projects you work on and the things you work on, are not the things you deal with in everyday life. But then you got to go from there to working on issues and then you, by the end of that, 12 years, you can kind of see the zeros and ones of the process. So for me, it's a lot of it. It was really exciting to be a part of that, but I learned a lot, and I'm love to, I'm glad that I'm still young enough to utilize that the rest of my life.
Absolutely. Well, that was just a ton of information and amazing what you've done really overall. That can you explain to some of our listeners? We have a lot of newer agents on as well. Like what are the moving pieces in insurance that cause stuff like that? So the crisis in 2010, like you mentioned in Florida, what causes that? What caused some of the dynamics there in the insurance industry?
Well, sure. So, I mean, look, the Florida really had a few years where it saw no major storms, and then it got hit in and had a number of major storms back to back. But what really caused the problems in Florida was the assignment of benefits law, coupled with the one way attorney fee statute. And so we if you look kind of back at 2022, Florida was 8% of total US property claims and 80% of the national litigation. We lost 12 companies in that in like a 24, 36-month time frame that either went out of business or left the state, and the market got incredibly difficult. Reinsurance spiked because, storms like Hurricane Irma were really like three storms for the insurance industry, especially for the reinsurance industry. And so they were coming in way over projections, and they were spending a lot more money than they expected to spend on that. And that was largely driven by litigation and assignment of benefits. The legislature in 2022 ended that. They ended the one-way attorney fee statute. Florida was an outlier in the country. We were the only state that had the one-way attorney fee statute on its books, and there was a ton of litigation abuse going on, and that led to all of these failures of companies. The challenge was, if you got $1 more than what your insurance company adjusted that claim for through litigation, and all of the insurance defense, I'm sorry, all of your costs as a consumer on the litigation side were paid for by the insurance company. So there are cases where the delta was, the delta between what the insurance company offered and what was paid was $143, and the litigation fees were 76,000. Well, look, I can model for hurricanes all day long. I can't model for that type of litigation. And that's what was causing companies to go under. They were losing surplus. That was the panic in the market. And so there's a great Churchill quote that Americans tend to do the right thing after we've exhausted all other options.
Mhm.
And what we found was that the legislature ultimately did the right thing. They got rid of the one way attorney fee statute. And that's really what's driven Florida back into a market that is functioning again. Because I would argue that in the 2021, 2022 timeframe, we didn't really have a functioning property insurance market. Citizens grew from its low watermark of 450,000 policies in 2015 to 1.4 million policies. It had about $10 billion in cash at the time and $500 billion of risk on their books. So it put the state in a incredibly financially precarious spot. But since the reforms of 2022, we've seen 17 new companies launch in Florida. Now, many of those companies were existing companies that launched a new line, or a new balance sheet of a new company. But we've seen that growth. We've seen the growth of insurance exchanges in Florida. But more so, we've seen new capital coming in, and we've seen that the models for the last couple of storms were probably too high, and that the pricing now is starting to come down on policies throughout the state. So we have more capacity, more money coming into the state. Reinsurance is getting more competitive, and pricing is coming down across the board. So it's exciting times. It's a different time. We've never seen the market shift as quickly as it has, from kind of fear to how competitive it's gotten over the last really 24.
Do you find that with the price reduction that more people are now, were they just uninsured during that time and now they're getting insurance again?
No,
Or
they weren't uninsured. They were forced to pay. I mean, most of these people have mortgages, so they can't be uninsured. And so ultimately, people were being forced to pay those higher prices, and insurance companies were forced to charge those higher prices in order to stay in business.
Mhm.
Like, what we see now is that rates are starting to come down, and they're starting to come down pretty aggressively. We're starting a number of companies that have filed for rate reductions across the state, across the board. Even places that were historically difficult to find insurance, like Miami-Dade,
Yeah.
and the Tri-County areas, are starting to see more and more companies writing in those areas. So I think the overall story is incredibly positive. And the catalyst for that was the legislature finally woke up, did the right thing, and got the attorneys out of the picture, which was causing all of the problems and dealt with the assignment of benefits issue, this, um, which was kind of driving the litigation in the state.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's awesome to see what's happened just over one small thing, how it's opened the market wide open. What does that mean for agents who are writing?
Well, I think the agents who are writing, they have more markets to go to now. If you have 17 new companies, those many of those companies are looking to grow their agent relationships in order to get enough policies kind of quoted to fill out their books. So I think there is more capacity in the marketplace. I think that the rates are beginning to come down, so that will affect probably some agents over time. But they have a lot more consumer choice than they traditionally did just 24 months ago, 36 months ago. There is new markets, new companies, and new pricing available to agents that just wasn't there 24 months.
Hmm. Yeah, big opportunity, basically, is what you're saying. Opportunity for growth as an
Sure.
agent.
Well, I mean, I think the opportunity to grow with the right company that you feel is going to be there for the long term in Florida and to offer your consumers better pricing. Right? I can't imagine being an agent and having to pick up the phone and saying, "Oh my gosh, we only have one company that will write you and the rates are going up 20-30%. Or we got to put you in Citizens." That's just not going to be an option going forward here. Citizens is not going to be Citizens is by the end of the year we'll have gone from 1.4 million policies, and by the end of 2025 they'll be down at probably right around 550,000 policies, which if you adjust for population growth is probably below their low water mark that they were in 2015. So, I mean, we've just never seen a shift like this in the entire history of the state of Florida. We've had this much market growth over, because the catalyst of one issue, which was the attorneys are no longer kind of running point on the process.
Yeah. You mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned it here yet, but there's like an 80% litigation. There's a metric you mentioned. What was that metric
Yeah. So
specifically?
in 2022 or 2021, either one. Yeah. So Florida was 8% of US property claims. So all claims filed in the country, Florida was 8% of all of the claims, but we were 80% of the national litigation. You had companies like Citizens Property Insurance. Now, they were the largest writer in Florida by far, but they were getting sued 900 times a month. I don't know if you've ever been professionally sued or, personally sued, but like, it's a pain. We were getting sued 900 times a month. Like, every day you open up and you got 60 new lawsuits. It's pretty wild. That was the world that we were existing in. Citizens were spending hundreds of millions of dollars just on insurance defense costs every year. It was unsustainable, right? And so ultimately the legislature did the right thing. That stopped, and we're now kind of moving to a new normal and a normalized market, which is incredibly positive for consumers in Florida.
Absolutely. You also, in addition to being involved in the Florida Policy Project, you own your own agency. What do you focus on specifically?
I don't own an agency. I have a risk-taking insurance company.
Oh, okay. I was mistaken there. A risk taking insurance company. What is that?
Well, it means we're a primary writer of property insurance in Florida. So we work with independent agents across the state, and in order to write insurance. So we're a homeowners. We write standard homeowners HO3 policies across the state.
Okay. Yeah. Um, does that, having the background that you have in legislature, what do you focus on in the policy making and writing for homeowners that other people don't?
Well, I think what we really focus on is growing our business, growing and providing exceptional customer service at kind of at the front end. So we started this company in April of this year. We've taken out policies out of Citizens. We've started our voluntary book. We're growing our business. It's an exciting time to be in the business, and watching this unfold. And as the chairman of the company, I'm focused on building the best team I can and making sure that we're taking care of our policyholders and people that
Absolutely.
we've made a promise to and have committed to working with us.
Yeah. Yeah. What changes do you see happening in the next couple years with policies?
Well, I think the key thing that you should see is like the market's probably pretty much set for new entrants. I don't see, you've had this wave of new entrants, 17 new companies enter into Florida. But the traditional way of entering in the state of Florida is to start a company, pull policies out of Citizens, get to 20 or 30,000 policies as a base load, because that allows you to cover your costs as an insurance company moving forward, and then starting to write a voluntary book. with Citizens getting down to 450, 500,000 policies, that is probably the true residual market of the state, right? That is probably, those are the homes that are coastal homes, multiple claims, very difficult for insurance companies to underwrite. Oftentimes, their rate has been suppressed so much by Citizens that you can't write it profitably and buy reinsurance. And so, oftentimes, what you're finding in that book, at least at the bottom of the book, is that their reinsurance cost, the premium doesn't cover the reinsurance cost. And so no company is going to write that policy because it just doesn't make sense. Why would I take policies out where I'm losing money from the day one that I start the company, or sorry, that I pull that policy out? So those types of things don't make sense. So we're getting to that point now where Citizens is kind of down to its low watermark, and Citizens will need to get creative in order to lower those those policy counts down even further.
Yeah. Um, you focus on Florida, but there's also, I mean, on the opposite spectrum, right? Deal with hurricanes over there. California is dealing with a lot of fires. There's a lot of people who can't get insurance there anymore. What do you think caused the market in California to be the way it is right now?
The government, yeah. So the government caused it. There's no doubt about this. The government has caused it. They have suppressed rates. Listen, insurance works when there's a true market, right? When people are able to adjust rates and where rates reflect risk. This is the problem that Florida faced too, right? Citizens grew so fast because its rates were disconnected from the actual risks that was out there. And so there was an inability to bring policies on at the right premium.
Mhm.
California is facing that right now. That's why its FAIR plan is exploding. They have suppressed rates to the point where companies can't write it profitably, and so they're not going to get into a business where they have to lose money. Ultimately, they've got to take care of their investors as well as their policyholders. And if they can't make money in the state, they're not going to get into the business and run their business into the ground just to do business in California. Nobody would do that.
Right, right, absolutely. I didn't really see it that way before, but how much government does play an impact in those areas. So another question I
Government has you government has been screwing up insurance for decades, right? The National Flood Insurance Program is a mess, largely because the federal government got involved in the flood insurance business in the 1960s. So we have all kinds of problems. Most of them are not related to the market. Most of them are related to the government.
What can we do about it?
Well, I mean, the best thing they could do is the government should implement best practices to focus on what's best for the consumer. And oftentimes what's best for the consumer is for the government to get out of the way. It's way too easy for government to come in here and suppress rates, do things that just regulate the insurance companies out of existence. But oftentimes the government gets in there, and then things like the National Flood Insurance Program, where everybody will agree that their rates are too low. But as soon as they want to go in there and raise rates, what ends up happening is the politicians get in there and say, oh, no, you can't raise rates either. And so they end up writing policies that are actuarially unsound. They incentivize people to live in places where God doesn't want you to live, and put you closer to the coastline and the only reason you're there is because you can get cheap insurance. That's, you wouldn't buy that house other than the fact that the federal government will subsidize your property, your flood insurance for that house. That it changes the market. It changes the math of coastal living, and people would build more resilient homes. They would build stronger homes. They would build up, or they would build away from those areas, except for the fact that the government is going to sell you a product underpriced.
Why do I mean, why do they do that? Why does the government subsidize them?
Politics.
What
Well,
benefit?
because it's politics. Because now we started the National Flood Insurance Program in the 1960s, and from the 1960s to today, right, like over 50 years now, all of those homes that were built in that area got subsidized rates. You can't change on a dime. We saw this back under Bridger Waters, where they tried to go to actuarially sound overnight. I was in politics then. I had people calling me up on the phone saying, where do I send my keys? Because I can't afford to pay $20,000 a year for flood insurance. And they were paying more in flood insurance than they were in their mortgage. I can't blame them. And so once the politicians heard this, they realized that too, and they went back to kind of status quo and providing incredibly subsidized flood insurance. I mean, the National Flood Insurance Program is something like $20 billion in the hole on after Hurricane Katrina and the other storms. Florida, unfortunately, is a net contributor. We pay in more than we take out to the National Flood Insurance Program. Although we have more lines of more coastline, most of our flooding is storm surge related, not inland flooding. But what you find is these other states have, the rivers rise, there's large storms, but they've incentivized people over the years to live in coastal area or live along the water, and they subsidize people to do that.
So you feel like they're too deep in to fix the issue, basically, because you can't.
Yeah, they're too deep in, right? And if they want to fix it even over time, what you're going to do is those homes become less valuable because people have to pay more for flood insurance. So there is, they have put themselves in a box. They've come out recently with flood rating 2.0, which is going to start raising the price for flood insurance incrementally. But we'll see what happens when they start to get political pressure and pushback on that too.
Yeah, yeah. So I feel like if you were
Most of the problems of the property insurance world, yeah, most of the problems of property insurance world are caused by government getting involved.
Mhm. And if they were
Because they
to
think about the practical.
grandfather
They don't think about.
yeah, if they were to grandfather people in and only new purchases or whatever pay the full price, then nobody would move, and then it would create other economic
Well, it's not
disruption.
that. Not that nobody would move. It would be that when you went in to go buy that home, instead of paying $2,500 or $3,000 for flood insurance, you're paying $8,000. Well, great. I've got to now take that off the value of the home, because over the long term, I'm going to pay radically more for that house. So that house isn't worth $500,000 anymore. Now it's worth 350 or 400, because I don't know what the flood insurance is going to be in the future. And I'm starting to pay more and more of that out of pocket. So it could affect the value of the home by 30, 40, $50,000.
If you were in politics again, what would you push for to address that?
Like states like Florida should the federal government should create a reinsurance pool. Because what it does, and what people don't realize is, like, most Floridians, most homeowners don't realize that their property insurance doesn't cover flood. What they want is an all perils policy. They don't care what happens. I've paid my premium. I get coverage. The simple truth is a vast majority of people don't have flood insurance because they're not required to have flood insurance, but they get a flood. And then they call their property insurance company up and they say, oh, I've got a flood. And then their agent has to tell them, oh, I'm sorry, that's not covered. Well, that's catastrophic, right? Because, these floods can cause thousands and thousands of dollars of damage, even with 1 or 2 inches of water in your home. But most people aren't buying flood insurance if they're not required to. So what they could do is incentivize states to get all perils policies. The reason property insurance companies don't write flood is because they can't get reinsurance for it. But if the federal government provided some reinsurance capacity for us to write at least the peril of flood, then you would see underlying property insurance companies writing that product. They want to provide that to their homeowners. They just can't get reinsurance for it.
Makes a lot of sense. I never thought about it that way. That's amazing. Well, for the sake of time, I know we're getting ready to wrap up here. If you had a magic wand and you had the power to wave it and fix the biggest problem that you face every day or that you see, what would that problem be? What would you fix?
Well, the biggest cost driver for Florida is reinsurance, right? It's we're sending, about 40% of every premium dollar that comes into an insurance company in Florida immediately goes offshore to Bermuda or London, to pay for reinsurance. So that's the biggest cost driver. But ultimately, we can deal with that. What we can't deal with is the changing environment of the legal environment in the country. And so ultimately, everything that we can do to incentivize homeowners and insurers to work out the process without litigation, we should do that. So it should be alternative dispute resolutions, appraisal, mediation. Those types of things are incredibly helpful to make sure policyholders are made whole, but also make sure that the process is running smoothly. The kind of one of the truest things in actuarial science is that a litigated claim is going to cost you about 4 times a non-litigated claim for an insurance company. So anything we can do to reduce the amount of litigation, but also get government out of the way, set best practices for what's best for consumers, what allows companies to charge an adequate, fair rate that's competitive in the marketplace, but also understand that anytime you turn the screws on the companies, ultimately that's going to trickle down. because it has to trickle down in rate somewhere along the line. And where we've seen the the worst aspects of what happens in property insurance market, it's almost always because the government got involved somewhere.
Mm, I hear you there.
So I guess bottom line, let markets.
Yeah, let it work. Don't disrupt it. Absolutely, that's what it's there for. Another question. So a lot of our viewership here, our audience, are agents that are actually writing, agency owners. If you had a piece of advice, and obviously you're heavily involved in PNC and that sort of the area in the industry, what piece of advice would you give to agency owners with everything that you know?
I think it would be, this is a great time to look to upgrade your relationships of the companies that you represent, but also, technology and artificial intelligence and are going to reform, they're going to change this industry just like they're changing every other industry. We're in the first at bat of the first inning of AI right now. And so they need to understand what tools they have. Customers largely don't understand what they're buying. Whatever else you can do to help them get a better understanding is really what I think is the agent's job in order to provide them the full portfolio of options. Most people, they buy their insurance policy, then they shove it in a shelf and they don't want to talk about it for the next year till the next year. And then they don't want to talk about renewals and everything else like that. It's the agent's job to really educate them, to understand, to get them to understand the breadth of coverages that they need, what the total risk profile is, what they're actually insuring themselves with their deductible versus what the company's taking on, and what the risks and rewards are for each of those choices that they're going to make. I think oftentimes that's the biggest challenge I see that agents have. But they're front line of this industry. They
Mhm.
play an incredibly important role. Yeah, everybody can go online and everybody can go online and they can get a quote for an insurance policy. But what the agent's role really is to help translate what that means, because most people aren't in the insurance business. They don't understand what their policy is. They don't understand what their coverage limits are. The important role of that agent is to help people walk that journey and for them to understand that insurance plays an incredibly important role in mitigating the risks of that surround us every day. And so the best thing they can do is be that facilitator, and anything they can do to help them understand that and build that relationship, I think is important.
Absolutely. I think that lines up very closely with almost every podcast I've done. One of the main takeaways that people have is they say, don't be a policy pusher or a peddler, but be a people person and help them understand. And it goes exactly with what you're saying. As technology evolves, as policy changes, as we have AI and everything, there's still a crucial need for agents and agency owners to really be that in between that helps people understand their coverage so that they they have good coverage. So,
That's it. The last thing we want is them to coming back to their agent and say, "You never told me this." Oh, and I'm going to file a claim against you, right? No, we want people to understand the full breadth of coverage, but understand um, that that's the role of the agent, is to really help people walk this journey and mitigate the risks that they're not even thinking about in their lives.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate it, Jeff. If any of our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they can get connected? Or maybe they're in Florida, they want to get involved.
Sure. You can just email info@flpolicyproject.com. I get those emails, and it's the best way to go. Go on our website, check out the Florida Policy Project. We talk about everything from auto insurance to homeowners insurance. I write a number of op-eds. They can look online for some of our op-eds. They're always posted on floridapolicyproject.com. And they can obviously look us up at Patriot Select Property Insurance Company, which is a Florida-based property insurance company that's growing based in Florida.
Awesome. Well, yeah, definitely reach out to Jeff, guys. Glad that he was here. And if you guys got value out of this, definitely reach out to him and then share this podcast episode, like it, follow it, DM it to somebody who may need to hear it. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Mm.
Bye-bye.